I think people are at the end of the road in terms of this employer. I mean, that our National Executive Committee has passed an unprecedented motion of no confidence in the probation service and HMPPS, and we just don't see how this is going to go. Members are angry and distressed and frustrated time and time again.
The Times is reporting that thousands of probation staff could take industrial action before the end of the year. It's raising questions about how the system will cope when the early release plan comes into force. Speaking on Times at 1, Mark Fairhurst, chair of the Prison Officers Association, gave his thoughts about the prospect of a strike.
Well, I don't blame them, and I wish them all the best. I don't blame them for walking out. They've been treated absolutely appallingly. They're struggling to cope with current workloads, never mind us keeping an extra 5,000 offenders on the doorsteps over the next 10 months. So solidarity with them on that score.
And when I spoke earlier to the former Chief Inspector of Prisons, Nick Hardwick, he had this to say about Andy Burnham's decision to review the early release scheme.
Look, it doesn't do any harm having a second look at something. The downside of that is it has created uncertainty for probation and for victims. And I think now, having had a look at it, what they now need to do is make a final decision and let the people who have to operate the system get on with putting as good arrangements as they can in place to manage it. So I think now they need to end the uncertainty, say we've done what we can, this is what we need to do. It's not a position we want to be in, but this is the least bad option.
I'm joined now by the Times policy editor, Oliver Wright. Ollie, it seems that with every review of this system, it unpeels yet another problem. Where do you think this leaves Andy Burnham and the government's plans?
So, I mean, if you go back to the beginning of this, I think Andy Burnham thought he was doing something quite clever when he reviewed Starmer's early release plan. He saw, the potential for this to cause quite a lot of problems down the track, not least the fact that, rapists, sex offenders were going to be eligible under this new scheme. So he announced this review, and that review reported reasonably rapidly, and he said, actually, no, I'm not going to allow sex offenders out. I'm not going to allow child groomers out and rapists, etc. There'll be a whole category of offenders that aren't eligible under this scheme. But the problem is, since then, it's kind of unraveled because, as we've reported, as others have reported, it's not quite as simple as he made out. And there'll be categories of people that fall into those categories that Burnham himself said would be excluded, who will, in fact, be allowed out. For example, some of those people in the north of England who've been convicted of historic grooming offences, they will be eligible for release, despite what Burnham said. And then you've got the big problem of the killers of PC Harper, and that's attracted a huge amount of public attention. They're due to be released from their manslaughter sentences. And the problem Burnham has is the law as it stands, he cannot say, well, actually, I'm going to let out all these other manslaughter cases, but PC Harper's killers are to stay in prison, because that would be chucked out by a court in short order for being illegal. So in some ways, what Burnham thought was sort of a nifty thing to do to show that he was different from Starmer has just led to sort of days and days of unwelcome public attention on this issue.
But the Conservatives, Ollie, say that it is a simple case, that you could just put down an amendment to legislation when Parliament comes back next month, and that would be a way of doing it. Parliament has the right to change the law in that way. And we've seen the public reaction. I mean, 880,000 people have signed a petition calling for this pair to remain behind bars. Does the government have to pay heed to a petition like that?
I think senior government lawyers don't believe that's true. So this idea is that you say, well, actually, we will exclude those people who are responsible for killing emergency service workers. Now, you could do that going forward, but what government lawyers think is you can't do that retrospectively. Parliament cannot legislate to keep two people in jail. They would have to do it for all those manslaughter cases. And certainly, the legal advice that Burnham is getting is that there isn't a sort of quick fix to this. Parliament couldn't come back in September and say we're changing the law to keep PC Harper's killers in jail, because that decision would be challenged in the courts, and the courts would decide that that was against their human rights.
OK, Ollie, thank you very much for filling us in on that. The story is complicated, but we keep trying to explain it and bring it to you as it happens with every development. The latest development, of course, is whether probation staff may be about to have a ballot and go on strike in the coming months. And, of course, they are the people who would be overseeing a lot of the prisoners who do come out on early release. We can now speak to Ben Cockburn, who's the national chair of Napo, the trade union for probation and family court staff. Ben, thank you for joining us on Times Radio. What's happening with the ballot? Do you think that members are going to strike?
Good afternoon, Carolyn. I think members are particularly concerned about the amount of work that's being pushed towards them by the prison crisis, and I think lots of members feel overlooked. Continually talk about the prison overcrowding issues, but what isn't really recognised, we don't feel, is that there is a massive overcapacity in probation at the minute, and that we do not have the staff that we need to do the job and haven't for a number of years. And there are ineffective and insufficient amount of work being done in terms of workload relief to prepare us for all of the additional work that's come from the Sentencing Act in any effect.
So at the moment, even before this next phase of early release, what is the proportion of probation officers, to released prisoners? What is your workload like at the moment, and how could that intensify after early release?
I mean, what you're effectively talking about from the Sentencing Act is they're incorporating into legislation all of the emergency schemes that we've seen in recent years. So early release of prisoners or earlier release of prisoners, changes to the recall process as well, which will see probation's workload increase dramatically. As well as that, we're seeing a presumption against short-term custodial sentences, so more sentences being served in the community. It just adds up the amount of work and the hundreds of thousands of hours of extra supervision that the probation service can be asked to carry on.
But some of your members will feel that they just can't cope with the extra numbers of prisoners that they're having to oversee?
I think it's not just prisoners, it's people serving community sentences as well. And where it stands now is that's the position we're at, even before these supposedly 5,000 people are going to be released in coming months. That's the issue that we've got right now, is we don't have the capacity to do the jobs that are in front of us as it stands now.
Do you think victim safety could be in question then and put in doubt?
I think despite the best intentions and the hard work and the thousands of hours of unpaid overtime and paid overtime that members have done in Napo and the wider workforce to try to keep the probation service afloat, it's undoubtedly the case that we cannot do the jobs to the best of our abilities if we're so overstretched in so many key roles, like probation officers, probation service officers working with people directly, like victim liaison officers or unpaid work supervisors. All of those roles carry vacancies that we're just not able to sustain anymore, and that's anger and a failure to see HMPPS or various different governments delivering for us is what's led to this current indicative ballot, which should be due to report the outcome of tomorrow morning. What
do you think it will decide, or what do you think the recommendation will be from the ballot?
I think people are at the end of the road in terms of this employer. I mean, that our National Executive Committee has passed an unprecedented motion of no confidence in the probation service and HMPPS, and we just don't see how this is going to go. Members are angry and distressed and frustrated that time and time again work is moved onto them from the prison service, but they do not get fair regard. They do not get the funding they needed to do the jobs, and constantly ministers will come out and trot out the 700 million figure from the spending review that currently got, but it won't actually talk about the small amount of money that's going towards frontline probation services, as opposed to hundreds of millions going to tagging contractors as well as to private firms.
So if industrial action does take place, and indeed that could coincide with the next phase of early release of prisoners, what do you think that could involve? Could it be working to rule, or actual refusal to work any hours, walking out completely? How would you envisage a strike working?
I mean, it remains to be determined. Obviously, we'll have an indicative ballot at this point in time, but options on the table could be things around work and contracted hours before any move to withdrawal of labour through strike action. I mean, I think even for a probation service that's so reliant on exploiting its workers to the extent that this one is, I think that work and contracted hours could cause significant impact on the ability of the government to deliver probation services in the community. And that's not a step that we take lightly. But again, this isn't just something we've arrived at overnight. This is the product of years and years of frustration and not being listened to and not having our ability to do our jobs delivered to us by HMPPS or by different governments.
And the idea that, oh, well, look, some of these people will be on electronic tags and you'll be monitoring them. Have you got enough staff to monitor all of the electronic tags and all of the people out on the streets?
Well, people in what HMPPS call sentence management, effectively managing people who are on licences or on community sentences, we don't have enough of those staff now. So the additional 5,000 people who are coming out as a result of the changes to the Sentencing Act in the first instance, and just remember this turns into legislation, all of those emergency schemes. So until things change, this is how it's going to look until the legislation changes. So that's a year-on-year increase in the amount of work that we have to do. We just don't think there's an ability to do that now, let alone with what's coming under the Sentencing Act come September time. And then that has played a role in the indicative ballot and the strength of feeling that our members have.
Well, I spoke to Nick Hardwick, the former Chief Inspector of Prisons, earlier, and he raised something that perhaps you're concerned about as well, that there could be a mistake. Somebody could commit another crime when they're out on licence, they've been released early. The fear that a probation officer, one of your colleagues, could become a scapegoat and criticised for not having done their job properly. Is that a concern that you share?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the pattern of behaviour that we've seen is that when these things do happen, that there is an element where individual workers are targeted because of organisational failures. And I think that's a very simple, straightforward solution for someone to point the finger and say, this person didn't do their job properly by not doing X, Y, or Z. What it completely ignores is that that person may have been trying to carry a workload of 150 to 200% in absolutely impossible circumstances, that this worker might have been one of ones where you've been qualified for 6 months as a probation officer and you're the most experienced probation officer in the team. I think those are the challenges that members face day in, day out. And there is absolutely a culture of fear in terms of what happens and what if something goes wrong through no fault of a person's, and how the serious further offence review system works and how it does target individuals for blame, often undue blame.
Well, we'll be looking out for the result of that indicative ballot. In the meantime, while I've got you, can I just find out what you think of some of the ideas that were floated by Reform and Nigel Farage this morning? For instance, saying that you could build Nightingale prisons to solve some of the prison crisis, or indeed just deport foreign nationals to another country like El Salvador or Kosovo. What do you think of those ideas?
I mean, having looked at the paper, I think I have to say not much. The idea of a pop-up prisons is just faintly ridiculous. If I lived anywhere near Ministry of Justice land, I'd be extremely concerned that planning rules, and if we leave the European Convention of Human Rights, my ability to sort of take any court case against the government for landing effectively a prefab prison next door to me, built by the British Army, who again, I'm not sure what their specialism in actually building prisons. The other issue that I have significant concern over is this proposal that people will serve 100% of their sentences in custody. Unfortunately, what I don't think is being explained properly is that means that at the end of that sentence, people who've been convicted of murder, serious sexual offences or even terrorism offences will walk out of the prison gate and possibly be completely unsupervised to come and go as they see fit, which at this point in time, because of the tireless work of probation staff up and down the country, doesn't happen because people are supervised when they leave prison. It's just some really concerning and I think ridiculously poorly thought out proposals from Reform today.
Well, Ben Coburn, thank you for giving us your thoughts on all of those issues. And as I said, we will keep an eye out and bring you any news of that indicative ballot by the probation and family court staff. If it happens this afternoon or indeed later in the day, it will be covered indeed by Times Radio and our later programmes.